serious committed relationship won't necessarily admit to it because it's just that atmosphere of the hookup culture that you don't want to go kind of against the grain and stand out and put yourself in a vulnerable position and admit, no, actually I'm tired of meaningless hookups. I want something more meaningful.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Also, I think maybe another boundary for people like getting into relationships is like when you don't see many of your friends or whatever it may be in relationships, like being the only friend with like boyfriend or girlfriend, a partner, it could be awkward because like, well, I think what we both see in our experiences is like not many people like are going to parties with their significant other or anything. So that can make maybe social life slow down a little bit, which is a fear because like definitely in your first and second years, you're developing these new friendships and connections and networks with people. And to have someone be your main source takes up a lot of time.
Right. I mean, it's a very common thing that I've heard about a lot of this kind of stuff in my political science classes, that there's always limited resources. You're going to have limited time. You're going to have limited attention, limited energy. So whether you want to or not, you're going to have to pick and choose what your primary and secondary and tertiary interests are. And what I see here most often at UChicago is that people, especially in their freshman and sophomore years, like Sam was saying, tend to focus on themselves and building a solid foundation to succeed in college and just in life. And I think they also tend to prioritize a more, let's say, exciting social life. So going to parties, meeting lots of new people, trying to accumulate that social capital when they're still in their freshman, sophomore years. So being in a relationship just very naturally falls into that tertiary priority position. And it might, things change. I think priorities tend to realign as students grow up and near the end of college. But I think, just as Sam was saying, the situation with most younger people here at the college is that sustaining a relationship just drains too many resources that, frankly, a lot of freshmen cannot afford.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And also, like, Sam was asked in an interview, like, would you like a relationship? Like, what do you, like, really want? And, like, not knowing when you're young is definitely okay in figuring things out. Like, we know with, like, certain, like, equilibriums, if, like, we broke it down, like, UChicago hookup culture, we have, you know, people who, like, in the equilibria are, like, dating. We have people who are involved in this hookup culture. And we have people who aren't involved at all with hookup culture and even dating. And I think probably throughout your time at UChicago, each of us will probably be in those three equilibria at some point.
Absolutely. So I think now is a good time, considering our discussions of changing priorities and equilibria as students progress through the university, to hear from some graduate students. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect.
This is Emily Kelin. I'm here with Leah Sofer, who is a first-year graduate student at the Harris School.
Hi, Emily. Happy to be here.
We wanted to hear some of your thoughts on hookup culture, especially how it exists or doesn't exist in graduate school. So could you start by telling us a little bit about what hookup culture is and what are some of your general feelings about it?
Absolutely. My general feeling about what hookup culture is that it's a culture of young adults and young professionals, particularly in America and I believe around the world today, where people are engaging in some kind of physical or sexual activity, anything from kissing and making out to intercourse that's casual in nature and that necessitates a lack of emotional commitment to another person.
So you mentioned a difference potentially between America and other places in the world. There seems to be a common belief that young people have kind of shifted the norms around dating. Do you think that millennials hook up more than previous generations did?
I don't think we're hooking up more than our parents or grandparents' generations did. I think it's more accepted and more talked about, and I think it's more out in the open, but I'm sure that people have been doing this for generations and that it's nothing new. We didn't invent it, but that we're more comfortable with it.
So one of the concepts that we've looked at in the analytical politics curriculum is coordination traps. And so we're looking in this episode at whether or not hookup culture constitutes a coordination trap. Could you explain what you think about that?
Absolutely. I think it absolutely is a coordination trap, which means that there are essentially two equilibria where people are all engaging in something or all not engaging in something, and one of those is better than the other. As we said in class, Pareto dominates the other. I think right now we're in this equilibrium where it's a common part of the culture for people to be hooking up with each other and have no commitment and no consequences, and it's often quite thoughtless. and it causes a lot of pain, and it causes a kind of a lack of thought about other people, and often a pressure for others to be engaging in these same like thoughtless acts that are not emotionally fulfilling and often also not physically fulfilling. And we're kind of stuck in this equilibrium because everyone else is doing it too. And I remember particularly in college, like everyone would, want to hook up on Saturday night after the party or whatever. And if you weren't doing that, then you feel out of place and you feel like you need to do that. But it's not that you actually want to. It's a peer pressure. And if we could move to this other equilibrium where people weren't doing that, there wouldn't be a pressure to do so.
So you mentioned a little bit about what hookup culture looked like in college. We're a few years out of school and a few things have changed since then. There has been some technological shifts that have probably changed how people hook up, even if they're not hooking up more or less. So can you just kind of give a general description of what hookup culture looked like when you were an undergrad?
So when I was an undergrad, Tinder wasn't a thing yet. Maybe it was invented like by the end of my senior year, but nobody was using it. So it was very much just based on like hooking up with your friends or someone that you meet at a party who you thought was cute, something like that. But it's changed a lot. I think culturally, once you're out of college, there's still a hookup culture, but it's not as strong. People start actually going on dates and thinking about their futures in a thoughtful way that people generally don't feel pressured to do in college. And now also people are using apps, like people use Tinder, and there's kind of a whole spectrum of apps that people will use, anything from pure hookup to more serious dating.
Have you or anyone you know use those apps, and what does that look like? Are people still meeting in person? Are they relying mostly on apps? Do they use apps for dating? Do they use them for hooking up?
I've only used them for dating, and I think people use them for all ranges of things. And I also think it's generally like different on different cultures. So I know in the LGBT community, it's a little bit different than for like non-LGBT. So it's kind of different for everybody. But I think there's a whole range of experiences. And it's funny now, I think online dating is so common that when people meet a partner in person, they're like, oh my God, I met him in real life. And it's it's exciting and a novelty rather than it being the norm. And now I think meeting people online is the norm.
Do you think that there's a hookup culture that exists in graduate school outside of online dates with other people?
I haven't seen much of it, but I think it depends on the school. I don't feel like we have it at Harris, but I couldn't speak for other graduate school experiences.
Thank you so much for sitting and talking with me, Leah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Emily and Leah, for that insight into graduate hookup culture. Something that I took that I found really interesting about this from listening to Sam's interview was that Sam really iterated on the fact that as an undergrad, you're still kind of figuring yourself out, what you want. And Leah expounded on how in graduate school, you kind of have figured yourself out. You want something a little bit more serious. And I thought that was really interesting. So therefore, maybe you see less of a hookup culture, per se, in graduate school.
Right. When you said graduate hookup culture, I almost wanted to say, or its lack. Although I also think it's quite curious that one thing that Sam and Leah said that was very similar is that hookup culture isn't necessarily anything new. It's not an actual upwards trend that we've been experiencing. It seems to me that other than the people we've just heard from, people I talked to on campus, the consensus seems to be that people aren't actually hooking up more in recent years than they did before. If anything, it might be less. I remember reading an article online that actually did research into the rates of how frequent hookups are at colleges in the US, and I believe that it's been about the same as it used to be in past decades. So the thing that I think has changed, and I have no idea why, that would be something worth exploring, is that it's the discussion about it that's changed. There's much more openness about hookup culture.
Yeah, and there's also the exposure with these, like, as they said in the interview, these new apps.
Absolutely.
So if you're seeing people from your school on the app, your mind is like, oh, they're also involved in the same hookup culture as me.
And also, like Leah was saying, it seems to be the expectation when you go to a party, probably Saturday night, you're going to see a lot of people going home together. So if you keep viewing that self-perpetuating image on dating apps, in real life, at various parties, you're definitely going to get the sense that, oh, it seems as if everyone's hooking up. And whether you actually want to or not, you're probably going to feel some pressure or maybe an incentive to participate in it as well. And I guess that depends on your outlook, but some people feel very uncomfortable with that kind of pressure, and some people enjoy it, you know?
I think with the pressures, definitely friend groups, but also the apps kind of do create a sort of pressure to say something, to say it correctly. Is really self-validating also. It's all really physical attractiveness when it comes down to it.
Because I don't know about you, but when you're engaging with people on dating apps, do you try to have more substantive, meaningful conversations in the hopes that it could lead to a relationship? Because I'm getting the sense that that's what it's like in graduate school. I definitely don't think it's that way in college. But
yeah. I think with, like, age comes a sense of maturity, hopefully. But I think it's just, with even the way you talk to some people in college, it's going to be short, like, conversations.
Right. Even if you're talking to a friend, especially freshman, sophomore year, when you're just entering college life, you're not sure what you want, and that applies to all relationships you have, hookups or not. I think by the time you're in graduate school, you figure that out a little bit more, so when you choose to invest in relationships, it's much more meaningful, which is probably why we don't see as much hookup culture per se.
Agreed. By the way, listeners, each episode we're going to answer one or two of your questions. Here's the question for today's episode. Where do people tend to find hookups? Is bar night really a good place for these things?
Well, I think Sam started answering the question for us a little bit, in that I think there's definitely different environments for different types of relationships you want to pursue. I would say the bar night is probably a good place to look for a very casual, most likely one-time hookup. More broadly, I guess, any frat party. And I really wanted to emphasize that. The expectation when you go to that type of party here on campus is that it most likely won't lead to anything. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. On the other hand, if you do want something a little bit more serious, something with more long-term potential, an apartment party would be a good place, I would say. What do you think, Katie?
I definitely agree. With frat parties, they're mostly loud, and a lot of the gaze is, like, sensory. How people look, the music.
Right. The dancing. The touching.
Yeah. So apartment parties allow for more conversation, more relaxed.
I mean, another thing, to keep in mind is that with an apartment party, because they're so small and quote-unquote intimate, I personally think you're very likely to find someone that you could potentially have a long-term future with, because you're most likely going to be going to an apartment party hosted by one of your close friends. So the other people at the party are going to be friends of your friends. So you'll have something in common. You'll probably have a very similar background. But it's still got that, I think an apartment party still has that kind of flirty vibe. It's casual, but it's constant.
Yeah. And, like, for those listeners and students at UChicago, as we're known to be a little more socially awkward, like as mentioned in the podcast, dating apps, Tinder, Bumble, things that college students use could facilitate these casual relationships as well.
Yeah. Will
they be with people from the college? Maybe, but it depends what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And I think they're great because they let you dip your toe in the water. You don't have to talk to anyone in person right away. You can really get a sense of what they're interested in, if you have anything in common, if you would like to actually pursue something with this person. And then, honestly, just reach out and ask them for a coffee date. There's lots of coffee shops on campus. The facilities are there. All you have to do is show up and just know that you're not the only one who's nervous. Yeah, the person sitting across the table from you shares all that nervousness and all that anxiety. So just come in with an open mind, share something about yourself, open up, and, it might go really well, because I think it's key to be sincere in these sorts of situations. I think
even with just casual things, it's good to be sincere.
Right. Get it out in the open.
Yeah. Because in your most vulnerable state, like, there's no reason to be fake.
Yeah. When you're actually trying to pursue something a little bit more serious at this college, you are being very vulnerable and you're giving something up. And you're surrendering a lot of your defenses when you're trying to see if it could lead somewhere. So be open to that, be kind, be sincere, and I think it will be great.
So thank you for your question and good luck.
Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like this is all the time we have for today. Thank you guys so much for listening.
We are Naked Love from UC3P.
My name is Ivanna Shevel.
And my name is Katie James. Listeners,